Game 4 was an absolute slugfest, filled with the continued beef between Dillon Brooks and the Warriors, multiple chippy altercations, and ultimately a series-defining possession that encapsulated the entire game. On an off night for Steph, the Warriors fended off several Rockets runs with methodical half-court basketball, classic motion to create shots for Buddy and Pods, and dialed in their defense against Sengun. Most importantly, to take a commanding 3-1 lead, it was Draymond Green who had the last laugh. Let's review. So I want to start out by talking about two stretches that were pretty bad for the Warriors. The first one, if you'll notice, was that Fred VanVleet had a pretty good night last night, importantly because the Warriors kept defending him in drop coverage, allowing him to get pretty wide open threes. Here Jimmy Butler tries a late contest, but VanVleet's going to take that step back three anyway with a lot of space. It's worth noting that the Warriors were obviously okay with him taking these threes, because they didn't really change their defensive coverage at all, especially in the second quarter. As he comes off this high ball screen, Moody is going to fight over, but they're not going to try and double. They're not going to try and get the ball out of his hands. Draymond is just going to stay planted and drop, and VanVleet's going to shoot off those screens. VanVleet hasn't had a great shooting year. He hasn't really had a great shooting series. So I think the Warriors were really okay with VanVleet attempting to get these shots. Here he denies that screen, but then gets another one from Amen Thompson, comes around, and then where's Jimmy? He's in drop, and VanVleet's just going to let it fly as soon as he comes to the three-point line. The Warriors were truly okay with all of these shots. And I don't think that it's necessarily bad that you're going to let Fred VanVleet continuously shoot off screen after screen while playing in drop, whether it was Looney, Draymond, Jimmy. I think the issue is that eventually, though, if he's making them, which to be fair, he hasn't been for most of this series, he's going to get in rhythm, and the Warriors don't necessarily want that. Now, the Warriors also had a really bad stretch to close the second half, and I think a lot of it started during this altercation where Dillon Brooks obviously fouls Steph. You can see Steph is actually instigating him here by holding up two, perhaps to signal that Brooks just gave him two free throws. And Dillon Brooks obviously doesn't like that, so he's just going to swipe down, and this little altercation happens. Draymond Green, maybe you think he doesn't deserve the technical, but I think we all know that when Draymond gets involved in these situations, it's more likely than not that he's going to get one. And then we have this incident, you could say, where Jimmy Butler and Dillon Brooks are talking smack to each other. I think the issue is not the Warriors shouldn't be talking smack. I think obviously there's a balance between enforcing and letting Dillon Brooks and company push your game out of rhythm. But what ended up happening is that because of all of that commotion, to close the second quarter, the Warriors ended up making a lot of sloppy plays, especially Steph with his dribble as he kind of loses the ball here. He might have been trying to bounce it to GP2, but the Rockets are immediately on that, and they're just going to instantly break into transition and get easy shots. I think the issue is that when the Warriors get hyped up like that, especially earlier in the game, they are the ones that are more likely to be turnover prone because that's how their offense works. They are generally more turnover prone regardless of what's happening. And when they're trying to play quicker, more excited, they're trying to get shots off faster. Even if they do, they're probably going to miss a few. And in this case, Dillon Brooks easily sniffs out Steph's attempted kick out to Jimmy Butler. And they're just going to get a lot of free buckets in transition, which we know the Rockets like to play in. The Rockets are a fast team that likes to play off of these turnovers. They don't like to play as VanVleet again dislodges the ball from Steph, and the Rockets are off in transition. They don't necessarily like to play in these slow half-court situations, and that's what the Warriors have to try and get them to do. They have to try and slow the game down, because when the Rockets start to run, when the Warriors get all psyched up because of these altercations, this ends up happening. And then the Rockets basically just went on a 7-0 run to close out the half. So coming back to that, as soon as they started off the second half, it was clear that the Warriors were a lot more composed, a lot more calm, and they were willing to execute in the half court. Here we have a situation where this is just a simple Buddy attack as VanVleet ends up planting his feet. This way he has his body turned, and as soon as he has his body turned, Buddy is already ready with that crossover and is just going to get the easy step. Even though Jimmy keeps telling Buddy not to dribble, whenever your defender gives you an easy step like that, you gotta take it. Here, VanVleet comes to set this high screen for Jalen Green to run off and presumably shoot. Now, similar to how they were treating Jalen Green, Draymond is willing to play and drop. The Warriors simply do not care that much, even if they're playing well, if either of these two guys are going to come off screens and shoot. The advantage of this, the advantage of Draymond playing and drop, is that the Warriors' defense on the backside isn't forced in rotation. They can all stay attached to their original men. They don't have to keep running around trying to deal with swings. And as a result, because of the poor shooting of Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet, he just misses that. Now the Warriors have already recovered 4 points off that lead. Now here, all that's happening is Steph getting the initial dribble drive in on Jalen Green. This is actually similar to what happened in the last game where Steph was being guarded out here. Basically, as soon as he makes that plant and his arms are sitting down in this position, almost like he's sitting, Steph is instantly up with the shot, and the contest is way too late. So here, we've already recovered basically the entire deficit, and now let's watch how Jimmy's drive inside on Sengun ends up drawing defenders, as now Jalen Green has to rotate. Sengun is a step behind. It looks like Amen Thompson is either crashing for the rebound or to box out Buddy Hield, but Buddy's actually just going to cut in the middle of the paint and get this wide open layup. So the Warriors kept moving. They kept creating those rotations in the half court early on. That's how they need to play. They have to slow the game down because the Rockets can't defend as well, especially when the Warriors are generating those easy looks off of doubles. Now here, Steve Kerr also threw a zone look at Jalen Green in this possession. You can see the Warriors are aligned in what appears to be either a 1-3-1, depending on how you want to do the math, or a 2-3. Regardless of what it is, watch as Jalen Green does get that inside step, but as soon as he gets that step, here comes Pods with the rotation, and then you can see the Warriors now look like they're in a bit more of a 2-3 zone, which ends up throwing off Jalen Green as he simply gets swarmed by Pods with the rotation, and then you have Buddy also making it difficult for Jalen Green to make this pass out to Alperen Sengun. Really nice to see the Warriors throwing zone looks early in the second half. Now here, with the score at 57-60, the Warriors are going to go into a post-split action as you see Draymond in the post, and now you see Pods coming to set the screen at the elbow for Steph to fly off. We've talked about the many iterations of the post-split before. As always, the man setting that elbow screen can always dive, and that's exactly what Pods does into open space. Sengun does kind of sniff this out and is able to get on him, and then Dillon Brooks makes that rotation to stop the wide open layup. Because of that, you just have to swing the ball, and this is where this read and react offense that the Warriors run, where their motion comes in handy. As now, as soon as you make that swing, because you force that rotation, now you're forcing a hard closeout so Jimmy can hit him with the pump fake. And now that Dillon Brooks is on the outside in the sidelines, now the Warriors have a 5-on-4, and now it's just up to continuous swings as he makes the swing out to Podziemski. But also notice that Buddy Hield was wide open, so there were a lot of shots they could have generated. Thankfully, Moody drains that as he had a really good shooting night. And here, again, let's look at this opportunity. Let's look how Steph swings the entire defense with a single step inwards. Keep in mind that Steph has not had a good shooting game, but all it takes is this inside step where it looks like Steph is either going to pass or drive to get both Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson pointing their feet, shifting all of their weight on the back foot, which opens up Buddy Hield to run unencumbered to the wing and get this shot. So you can just see how they both ended up moving that way, and now VanVleet's just left Buddy with way too much space, and he's just going to drain that and put the Warriors up 10. So a really solid start to the second half, all aided by slowing down your offense, by playing good half-court defense, and not letting Houston get out in transition. Now, the next thing I wanted to cover was how the Warriors defended Alperen Sengun and how we found early success, and then how Draymond Green switched that on him. So the first thing to notice, and as we've covered before, is that although I think the Warriors love to attack that outside dribble of Sengun, he also loves to go to it because he can finish with his right hand, as he ultimately, although he's going left, watch as he switches hands in midair to get that right-handed floater. Sengun will try virtually anything he can just to get to his right because he likes that more. Here he has this mismatch with a smaller GP2. Watch what he does. He turns to his left, but then finishes with his right off the glass. So Sengun was having a lot of success with that early on. Here he is against Draymond again. Where is he going? He's turning this way to finish with his right hand. So then what did Draymond Green do throughout the game to try and make it harder? Well, the first thing is that Draymond just tried to make him go left or finish with his left. Here, Sengun has that left-handed outside dribble. Watch as Draymond Green is making it really difficult for him to get this easy turn either way and try and finish with his right. But as soon as he does that, it's then up to Draymond Green to give him a bump as soon as he makes that initial shift and tries to finish off one foot. Even though he ends up getting the shot attempt, he's doing it with his left, and ultimately it's not as good of a finish. Now in this opportunity, what Draymond does is relatively simple. He's often willing to live with Sengun taking these more wild shots or step-back jumpers, especially at the free throw line. He's just not as accurate, and obviously he'd prefer to do his dirty work close to the basket rather than at the free throw line where he puts up this wild shot and it doesn't go in. And finally, I want to look at this next possession, which happens at the start of the third quarter. Watch initially as he has that right-handed outside dribble. He's going to make this turn, but I want you to pay attention to how Draymond Green bumps him right here. As soon as he makes that bump, as we showed you in the first possession in this segment, he likes to finish off this single foot. When you give him that bump, even if he can get to his right hand, that finish is a lot more awkward, and ultimately he can't get it in the bucket. And it was possessions like that, which were really good defense from Draymond Green, who's obviously much smaller than Sengun, but by this point in this series, knows the in and outs of how to guard Sengun, where to put his weight, when to bump him on his shot attempts, and where he's more willing to live with Sengun shot. Now finally, I wanted to cover the closing stretch just to show you how the Warriors took all of these things and put them together in order to seal the game away. So the first thing that was giving the Warriors problems, especially in the fourth, was Steven Adams. Steven Adams was making great rotations, good blocks, was a nuisance on the offensive end. The Warriors are undersized and they simply can't do a lot to him. So what did Steve Kerr do? Well, he does the Hackin' Adams. He pretty much just put Kevon Looney in the game to give Steven Adams these two fouls as he gives him a nice little warm hug here. That's the first foul, and then just a few seconds later, basically as soon as this inbound happens, you can just see Kevon Looney sprinting up just to give Steven Adams a hug, and he even looks at the ref while doing it. Steve Kerr didn't want Adams in the game, and Ime Udoka obliges because you simply can't have Steven Adams taking free throws in the clutch. Now in this possession, the Rockets also started going to Fred VanVleet inverted ball screens as he was having a really good shooting game. And it's also really tough for the Warriors to defend in the way they were when they're not willing to switch and when they want Draymond Green in drops. Fred VanVleet kept burning them on these shots as he gets one with 4 minutes to go. And then again, Fred VanVleet is going to come set this back screen onto Jimmy Butler. And as soon as Sengun gets inside, he's just going to flip it back to a Fred VanVleet who is wide open and drains it. Obviously, we know VanVleet was having a good shooting game. And because of that, the consequence of playing that defensive coverage on Fred VanVleet is that he's going to be more confident when taking those threes and he might make more. And finally, this is in the last minute. The Rockets end up getting a pretty good mismatch here with GP2 on Sengun, as again, he turns and then finishes with the right hand. That's his favorite shot. They let him have it, but now let's see how they tied everything together in this final possession. So remember those inverted ball screens? Well, the Rockets are trying to do that yet again, with Fred VanVleet trying to set this screen on to Draymond Green right here. But now it's worth noting that the Warriors are not going to let that happen, as GP2 is actually the one denying VanVleet from setting that screen in the first place, which allows Draymond Green to stay with Sengun in this ISO. So the first thing to notice is that those two inverted ball screens that we covered can't happen here. And now it's Draymond Green in isolation against Sengun. What did we talk about earlier on? We don't want Sengun to finish or shoot with his right hand, but if he has to, where do we want him to do it? We want him to do it outside of the low post. Take these shots near the free throw line, take these shots out here, and the Warriors can live with that, as Draymond Green doesn't budge at all when he makes that initial pound dribble, and then he gets his hand up immediately because he now knows that Sengun is going to want to turn around and finish with his right hand, and because of that, he gets a really good contest. He's super far away, he's off balance in the middle of the air, and he doesn't get a great shot, and then here comes Jimmy flying in for that clutch rebound. And I think if we can watch that again, but from another angle, you can see how Draymond really tried to get inside with that initial bump as soon as he picks up the ball. And then watch him turn, watch how Draymond already has his hand extended, and then forces Sengun, as he kind of flicks his head back, to put a pretty wild floater from the free throw line as Jimmy flies in for the rebound. So I think the past two games are clear proof that Steve Kerr's playoff experience and adjustments can be the difference makers when the margins are this slim. This series, just a few key stops or open shots have made all of the difference in these three close wins. And ultimately, I think it's obvious that the Warriors have a better half-court offense pretty much exclusively because of their gifted shot creators like Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry. But I think the difference has actually been their equally threatening half-court defense that's actually edged out the Rockets on the back of Draymond Green alone. Thanks for watching. Let us know if you agree.